Hello FlossTube and welcome to part 10 of the celebration of colours stitch along. Do you know, even though I don't have hair, I still flick my hair and then I'm like, oh, that looked really weird. Anyway, I am Ros Clark. This is Ros Clark Craft here on YouTube, and you can also find me as Ros Clark Craft on Instagram and on Etsy. So part 10 of our celebration of colour stitch along is blue. We are making our way so fast around the colour wheel now. We've only got 2 more weeks after this. So this is mine. I really love it in these colours. So you can see there's really not very much left to fill in. We've done all, have we? No, I was going to say something that isn't true, so I won't say that. We filled in all the blue, so there are some squares that are filling in. I really love how this one, in these colours, it just reminds me of a daffodil in the blue sky. I don't know what yours looks like. Maybe it reminds you of something else. As we're filling in, so we're seeing the blended colours that we were talking about last time coming out in this square, the complementary colours that come out in this ladder. Also just pay attention to these groups in the very last column. These aren't a specific set of colour combinations from around the wheel. It's not like the ones that are opposite here. But they're, in each case, I've sort of chosen a middle colour and then 2 different options for colours that might go with that, just to give you a chance to see, oh, okay, things that contrast, things that complement, things that are similar, things that are different, things that are the reddish shade of this colour or the bluish shade of that colour. So just, you know, that's a nice place to look and see how you're enjoying the colours working together. Obviously, we're filling in our rainbows here and the spectrum here. We're going around our wheel. Some of these squares are obviously already complete, and it's not that hard to work out how things are going to finish off, although I think even in the very last part 12, there is something that you won't have been able to predict. So keep stitching, keep enjoying it. Like I said, I think last time, I have got a couple of really busy weekends at the end of March, so I'm getting ahead. So I'm filming this a week or so before you will see it. And next weekend, I will be filming the last 2 videos. If you haven't already put a question in about what you'd like me to talk about, it may be too late, but you could try. And even if I don't have time to include it in the videos that I'm filming, for this, I will try and answer you in the comments, or I might answer you in a normal FlossTube or whatever anyway. So do feel free to ask, you know, if the things that have come up as you've been stitching through this that you thought, oh, I always thought you couldn't do X, Y, and Z, or why does it look like this, or, you know, then ask, because that's what we're here for, is to celebrate and enjoy, but also learn about colour. So I hope you have enjoyed this week's stitching. And what I wanted to talk to you about this week, do you know, it's funny, some weeks I've been like, no, I know I need to talk about this. Like last week I was doing variegated floss, and I'm like, I really need to talk about that so people understand how variegation works and colour mixing and so on. This week I was like, I don't know what to talk about. I don't know what to talk about. And then I was like, oh, maybe I could do this. And then I was like, oh, I don't know. It's not that exciting. And then suddenly I remembered something that I hadn't thought about for years, and I'm like, I absolutely need to tell people about this because it's so amazing. So we're going to get to that, but where we're going to start is, how do you talk about colour? If I have a colour in front of me down here that you can't see on the screen, and I'm describing it and I want you to picture exactly the same colour, how do I do it? Well, I can use words. I can say, you know, it's a sort of pinkish yellow, sort of peachy colour. It's a bit like the colour that you sometimes get in a sunrise, but not really in a sunset. No, it's a bit grayer than that. It's a bit... I can try, but it's quite hard to pinpoint precisely the colour I'm thinking of, because our words are very imprecise about colour. And we've sort of seen that in different ways, haven't we? we talked about, what colours that we talked about at the beginning with, oh, I think we were just talking about language of colour generally, and how in some languages they just don't even have colours, words for certain kinds of colour. And, you know, language is not a great way of describing colour. And we know this. If you ever have tried to describe a colour to someone who is colourblind or completely blind, I don't know that they really get anything out of what we say. There's a wonderful episode I really like, Say Yes to the Dress, because, you know, I've never got married. I've never had a chance to try on lots of pretty wedding dresses, but I really like watching other people do it. And there was a wonderful episode of the one in Lancashire with Gok Wan, with a bride who had lost her sight. So she was somebody who had been able to see previously, but had lost her sight. So she did understand colour, and she did have some sort of mental references for colour. And she put on this dress and she looked absolutely beautiful. And she had this really stunning dark red, long dark red hair that I would love to have hair like that. And he described her as looking like a fox in a winter snowy landscape. And it just lit her up, because she could imagine that. She could see that colour of her hair against the snowy landscape. And it was a beautiful image that she could carry with her. But he didn't try and say, well, and you know, it's this sort of shade and it's slightly veering that way, but don't imagine it this and whatever. He was just like, no, I needed just a reference that she can see the colour in her head. Now, why does it matter if we're looking at a colour? Why does it matter whether or not we can describe it precisely? Well, it matters if you are Mr. or no, we've just had International Women's Day. If you are Mrs. or Ms. CEO of Megacorp, and you have your brand logo in a specific colour, and you are trying to communicate with your manufacturer in a country, you know, thousands of miles away across the world, and you say, yeah, I need you to manufacture these things in my precise brand colour. And they say, okay, that's great. What is it? And you say, well, it's kind of red, but it's slightly on the pink side of red, but a little bit darker than you might be imagining. It's not like a cherry. And they're like, okay, how are we going to get the colour that you want? How are we going to get the colour that you want? And what you do is you have to have a reference colour. So we do this, I think, in stitching by using DMC as a reference colour. And I love it when dyers, I think, I'm not going to name names because I'm not sure I've remembered the right people, but certainly there are some dyers of linen and even floss who will include photographs and numbers of DMC threads together with their hand-dyed things, so that you can compare and you can say, okay, well, that's DMC, you know, 837 or 242 or whatever it is. And then you look at your skein of DMC and say, okay, and I can see in the picture their colour is a little bit lighter, not quite as grey, bit pinkish. Okay, and then you've got an idea in your head exactly what you're looking for. I have the DMC colour card and I really recommend it. Don't get the printed one. You absolutely need the one with the real threads. It's about 20 quid, I think I paid for mine, so it's not nothing. You don't necessarily need it. Lots of us will have a shop nearby, even if you don't have the whole DMC colour range at home, you know, a Hobbycraft, but often a local stitching shop of some kind will have a DMC stand which will have most, if not all, of the colours. And you can always go and just check, okay, no, I can see it's that colour. I was thinking it was a bit more like this, but actually it's that. Okay, that is what I want, or that isn't what I want. So I think that's a really helpful thing to do. And DMC, because it's manufactured to a set formula, is a reliable reference guide. So, you know, you're taking your photo over there in Canada or America or the other side of the world, and I'm standing here in the UK, but I know if it's got the same DMC number, then we're both looking and talking about the same colour. And if you're in the graphic design world or any kind of design world, you do essentially the same thing, but you don't use DMC. DMC only has a few hundred colours. You would use Pantone. So Pantone, I think it's been around for a long time. I don't know exactly how long, but it's been a really necessary part of the design industry for a long time, because that's how you would do it. You know, if you're Mrs. CE over here and you're talking to your manufacturers over there and your design team over there and your advertising team over here, and you want to make sure you're all talking about the same color, precisely the same color, not just generic red, but, you know, Coca-Cola red or whatever it is, you need a reference. And that's what Pantone do, is they provide references. I looked it up. They have two different systems depending on the sort of material that you're talking about, whether it's printed graphics on paper or whether it's something for sort of fabrics or home interiors or whatever, because different materials take color differently. One of their systems has 9,000 and something colors, the other one 3,000 or so. So that's quite a lot of colors. That's a lot more than DMC, for example. And that's how you can get really specific shades that are just slightly different. Like the red in the Google logo is just slightly different from the red in the eBay logo. Neither of them are quite the same as Coke red. And you want to make sure, you know, colors are so important in branding that you want to make sure you've got that right. And if you're producing, I don't know, Coke cans, but you're also producing baseball caps or, you know, TV adverts and billboards and whatever, you want to make sure that you're getting the same color represented in all of those places. And that's what Pantone does. In the recent years, Pantone has become a little bit more public facing. So, you know, they try and do color trends. You get the color of the year. Do you know what this year's color is? I don't like it. It's peach fuzz. I mean, I just think fuzz is a really bad name for a colour anyway, because their colours are solid and flat. They are not fuzzy at all. And peach fuzz is the least appealing bit of peach, I think. I really like a nectarine because it's a peach without the fuzz. But also that peachy tone doesn't really do it for me, I'm afraid. But also you might have seen like Pantone colour mugs, or I think I've got a Pantone colour notebook, that kind of thing. So they're trying to, you know, own colour. They don't own colour, but they do own, and they call it this, a colour language. It is a way of saying this colour and not that colour. And it's, you know, by reference to a number. It's Pantone number, whatever. And I think I don't know if they all have names. They might do. But it's the number that you want that describes it. And we describe colours in terms of numbers in other ways too. So if you've ever done any kind of web design, I think if you use Canva, this sort of thing comes up. Certainly if you use Photoshop or anything like that, and you're choosing colours, there are various numerical ways of describing each colour. There are two different systems effectively. There's one for screen colours and one for print colours. And I'm not going to go into the science of why they are different. They just are. And screen colours, instead of using red, yellow and blue, which is what we have been thinking of as our primary colours, we'll use red, green and blue. Again, I'm not going to go deeply into all the science of that, but it's effectively because your screens are emitting light rather than absorbing and reflecting light. Anyway, red, green and blue. And so two main systems for that. There are hex codes and RGB codes. So the hex code you'll recognise because it has a hashtag at the beginning. And then you usually get 6 characters. There is a simplified version where you just get 3. But usually you would get 6. And those are 3 groups of 2. And each of those is a number that tells you how much of that particular colour, the red, the green or the blue, is included in the mix. Now, they don't always look like numbers, you might say, if you've ever seen a hex code. That's true. They are not base 10 numbers, they are base 16. So that means they've got all the numbers from 0 to 9. And then they've also got 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. We don't have numerals for 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Our numerals stop at 9. So they use A, B, C, D, E, F. But they're not really representing letters, they are numbers. So A is 10 and B is 11 and so on. So you get 3 of these 2-digit hexadecimal base 16 numbers. Don't worry if you don't understand the maths. What it means is each of those 2 digits, so our digits, I'm now going into maths, sorry. If you have 1 digit, there are 10 options, 0 to 9. If you have 2 digits, there are 100 options, 0 to 99. Base 16, 1 digit, 16 options, 2 digits, 16 by 16, that is 256 options. And you have 3 of those, red, green, and blue, and that means you end up with about 16 million hex codes. That is 16 million different colours that can be represented. That's probably enough, isn't it? I don't know that the human eye can distinguish 16 million colours. I don't think it can. But actually, the point is not, can you distinguish all of them separately, but can you use them? Are there enough to create on a screen, not just a sort of brand logo, but a film or a video game, or, you know, a hyper-realistic graphic of something? How many colours are there in nature? An infinite number. Is 16 million, excuse me, is 16 million enough that when we look at it, we think, yeah, that looks realistic to me? It kind of is, I think, just about. I don't know whether 4,000 would be. I don't think it probably is. Even if you think, well, I can't distinguish 4,000 colours. Actually, you can distinguish a lot more colours than you think. And I think 4,000 colours, you would still see something of the granularity of that. 16 million, something much smoother. RGB, red, green, blue, is a similar system. So again, it's 3 numbers correlating to how much red, how much green, how much blue. And those are just ordinary numbers from 0 to 299. So the options you've got there are sort of 300 by 300 by 300, which I have now not worked out. I think it must come to 27 million, something like that. So more than the hex code, but in that same sort of order of magnitude, 60 million, 27 million. Yeah, I think that's right. And then there's something called sRGB, which I'm not quite sure what that stands for and how it's worked out, but I think it's a bigger version of RGB. If you're doing web design, generally a hex code is absolutely plenty. If you're doing, you know, feature film for which you're hoping to win a cinematography Oscar, then you would probably go for the sRGB with its however many more million colours there. And as, you know, the technology changes for cameras and screens, the technology to distinguish more and more colours becomes even more important. So that's on screen, but what I really want to talk to you about is in printing. So if you've got an inkjet printer, I think probably if you've got a laser printer as well, but I'm not sure. If you've got an inkjet printer, anyway, colour printer, you will usually have to load 4 cartridges. Sometimes it's 1 black and 1 colour, but the colour one will have sort of 3 parts within it, and sometimes it's 4 entirely separate ones. And those are known by the letters C, M, Y, K. C is cyan, which is a kind of greenish blue, kind of a lovely turquoisey colour. M is magenta, a sort of pinkish purplish red. I love magenta. Yellow is yellow. So that's C for cyan, M for magenta, Y for yellow, K for black, obviously. It's not B for black because that would be too easily confused with B for blue, as in RGB. So it's K for black, and that gives you 4 variations, C, M, Y, K. When printers print, certainly inkjet printers, they are printing in, they don't mix the ink. What they do is each ink is printed separately. So like in large scale print factories, I think they still sometimes do it like this, probably, but certainly they used to. print the same piece of paper or fabric or whatever it was 4 times. So you'd lay on the black, the yellow, the magenta, the cyan in different passes through. Home printers, inkjet printers don't do that. They do it all at once, but they are printing each colour separately. You'll get the blues, the magentas, the yellows, and the blacks. And you can tell this. Sometimes if one of your cartridges is running very low or has run out, it will just print without that colour, or with just sort of stripes of that colour. And you can see how it changes the colour of the whole thing to have that missed out. And usually when you get new cartridges or a new printer and you put them in and you get that test page and you can see the separate colours, the yellow, the magenta, the cyan, those are the colours that it's working with. And it's putting them together, not, as I say, by mixing the ink, but by printing tiny, tiny dots of each colour, different quantities and different arrangements to generate something that our eyes perceive as different colours. If it's a pale colour, there will just be fewer dots overall. If it's dark colour, there will be a lot of dots very closely together. If it's a more reddish colour, then it will have more of the magenta and the yellow. If it's a greenish colour, it will have more of the yellow and the cyan. If it's a bluish colour, it will be, or is that, no, bluish colour, yellow and the cyan. Green and cyan. Oh, now I'm confused. Anyway, it works. It is amazing how well it works, and it works far better for some reason than if they'd used red, yellow and blue. Having the red slightly tilted towards purple and the blue slightly tilted towards green gives a much more realistic, naturalistic, I guess, set of colours and tones than if you went for a more standard primary red and blue. Now, because this is colours created by dots, I'm like, oh, well, that sounds a bit like how we do it in cross stitch. And it is how we do it in cross stitch. But what I want to show you, this is what I remembered, and I'm like, oh, this is really exciting and you should definitely see this. It is cross stitch, and it's cross stitch using 4 colours of DMC. A black, a cyan, a magenta, and a yellow. And let me show you the first examples. So this is a lady called Evelyn Kasikoff. She's a graphic designer and an artist, and she was really fascinated by the way that CMYK printing works, and she wanted to see if she could replicate that at a much bigger scale using embroidery. And she does use cross stitches, although not on cross stitch fabric, and that allows her to do her cross stitches not in the sort of regular grid fashion that we are used to. So this is an early piece that she did, showing CMY colours stitched in 4 different thread thicknesses. So this is a piece, I love this so much. And what I'm going to do is show you, she's got it on her website in sort of full size and then smaller and smaller, and the smaller it gets, you can see the more your brain is processing it as shades of colour rather than dots of colour. But her whole point was to do it big so that we could really see the patterns that are going on. And you can see the way the cross stitches are lying at different angles. The paler side, where she's using just one strand going all the way across to, I think, all 6 strands at the far side. And you can see how that gives us paler colours, darker colours. And then she's adding in the cyan, and then the magenta at a different angle, the yellow at a different angle, and finally the black, so that you've got much denser stitching. I love that. I absolutely love that. It's how those colours work together. So she started doing these sorts of experiments with thread thicknesses, stitch density, different kind of patterns and angles and overlapping. You can see here where she's doing some of that working out, and the angles that she's stitching at and the overlapping that they are giving. But where she ends up is with what she calls the XXXX swatch book, and it is a whole book that she puts together of each page has little squares. In fact, I don't know why I'm holding it. I'm going to show you. This is a page from her book. Little squares showing you different combinations of the 4 colours. So this page on the left, you'll see some of those examples have only got 2 shades, some have 3, some have got all 4. And then on the right, where she's done this kind of swatching the gradient all the way through. And I just love that. If you look in the middle of that page, it's green, isn't it? But it's not. It's yellow and cyan, but it's green. Or at the bottom corner in the middle, I mean, that looks orange, doesn't it? But it's not. It's magenta and yellow. I just love it, how she is generating colour using stitching. I'm going to include there. There's a picture there where you can see a lot of the pages kind of laid out here. I'm going to put a link below. Go and check it out on her website, because there's a lot of pictures you can see of how she's worked all of this out. And I think it's really fascinating. And this is what is happening every time your inkjet printer is working, every time you get a newspaper that's printed in colour, or a book that's printed in colour, posters, all kinds of things. This is how they're printing, unless they are using a sort of screen printing method or a manual printing method where they're mixing ink. Most things, most mass-produced things will be printed using this technique at a tiny, tiny scale. And she's blown it up, and she describes it, and I love this. It's a book about printing in which nothing is printed. Everything is stitched. And I just think that's gorgeous. So yeah, cyan, magenta, yellow as our print primary colours. I wonder how we would feel about that if we thought in stitching terms, cyan, magenta, yellow, rather than red, blue as primaries. There are no promises here, but I have to admit, when I went back to the Evelyn Kasikoff work, I did start to think, oh, that would be a really fun idea for another colour stitch along, wouldn't it? Maybe. Watch this space. For now, we are finishing our colour wheel and our colour celebration. Next week, we'll be on to blue, purple, and then we'll be done. So next week, I am going to be looking at some finishing ideas and potentially answering any questions that you've had. All right, happy stitching. See you next time.